Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. My name is Morgue, and I'm an ex-Christian revealing hidden knowledge to help create a new world. And today we're taking a look at the Devil's Secret Wife, the forbidden and banned love story between Satan and Lilith. So a lot of people are familiar with Lilith as being Adam's first wife, but we're going to be taking a look at her story and seeing that it doesn't end there, that it actually continues in a book called the Zohar that describes her dark relationship with Satan. And it's actually extremely interesting as they create this dark dynamic pair of chaos, destruction, and sexuality, which kind of is an inversion or mirrored form of that pair that Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene create. So we have a lot to talk about today. It's going to be really good. A lot to dive into. And also it reveals about these forces within ourselves as well. Oh, and let me tell you, there's also going to be farts in this story. Yes, I know that sounds strange and weird, but there is. And that's not a joke. You're going to see why. It's a little strange, but not very many people are familiar with this part of it. But let's get started, my friends, okay? So before we get started, as always, please hit like and subscribe. I appreciate it very much. It's helped spread this information. And if you want to see my channel grow, become a member. You can become a member right here on YouTube by hitting the join button below this video. Hit the join button. You can see all the different perks you get at the different tiers. You can get access to our members only videos. There's like hundreds of them now. There's a new one every week. We're having one right after this, by the way, called Is Death Now Reversible? That's going to be a really interesting video. You can get access to our Discord server, all that stuff. Check it out. Become a member. It helps out a lot. I really appreciate it. I also want to remind you that my new book is available right now, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. So check it out, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. The link is in the description of this video. There's a couple of my books out, actually. And as always, give me a follow on Spotify. Look up Dawn of the New Earth on Spotify. All right, here we go, my friends. So Satan and Lilith, as well as exploring the concept of the angel of death. There's a lot to unpack here today. And what we're going to begin doing before we get into this dark pair formed by Lilith and Satan is we're going to explain a little bit about who Lilith is. Probably a lot of you are familiar with who she is, but let's dive into it with a little more rigor, a little more detail. So I have some notes here. Let me bring this up because the legend of Lilith is actually a bit complicated. So let me, where are my notes here? So Lilith, actually, the idea of Lilith actually became, can be traced back to Mesopotamia. So it was in Mesopotamian mythology. She's referred to as Lilu, which is a type of night demon. And the Babylonians had a similar figure called Lilitu. And so we didn't really have her full story yet. She started off as this ancient myth and legend of just this type of demon called Lilu or Lilitu. The story that we know today about Lilith being Adam's first wife comes from a book called The Alphabet of Ben Sira, which was written later. And this is actually very interesting, where we first understand Lilith as being the first wife of Adam in this book called The Alphabet of Ben Sira. But then even later, in medieval Jewish mysticism, specifically in a book called the Zohar, it then describes Lilith's dark relationship with the angel of death, or Satan himself. So let's take a look a little bit about what this book, The Alphabet of Ben Sira, really said. Now, there's I'm reading right now from jwa.org, which is Jewish Women's Archive. So jwa.org. And it's talking about the Alphabet of Ben Sira. This is where the story of Lilith is found. And it says the excerpt below is from the Alphabet of Ben Sira, which is a provocative and often misogynistic text. So what what a lot of people don't really realize is that this book wasn't written as like a book that's supposed to be empowering for women. It was demonizing Lilith. It said that Lilith wanted to be equal to Adam, so she was punished and demonized. It wasn't really a positive thing. It was a negative thing. But we have embraced her story as one of a very powerful feminist figure, a figure of women's liberation who stands up to the patriarchal forces represented by Jehovah and becomes a force of rebellion. And ultimately, as we see in the Zohar, pairs with Satan, whose very name means adversary, to become the very adversary to this patriarchal structure. But it's important to realize, right, that this was not written in a positive or empowering way. It was a misogynistic text. But what's happening here? It says, so in the story of Genesis, where it describes the creation of the world and the creation of human beings, here's something very interesting. There are actually two different accounts of creation in Genesis, and this has confused religious individuals for a long time. It's like, well, why are there two accounts of creation? Well, I'll give you a hint. Because it's a story, and there were two versions, and they put both of them in there. Because it's a story. But if you take a literalist interpretation of the Bible, why are there two accounts of creation? And they're, trying to figure out why. Well, in the first account of creation, it says here in the first account, God seems to create male and female as one being and then splits them in two. But in the second version, God creates Eve out of Adam's rib. And so there's a lot of different explanations as to why this is. And again, I'll tell you why. It's because it's a story. It's because it's made up. But a lot of people try, if you believe that it's true, you have this discrepancy and you have to try and figure out, well, why are there two accounts of creation that are a little bit different from each other? Doesn't really make sense. So Ben Sira, the author of the Alphabet of Ben Sira, suggests that the first account was of Lilith and the second account was of Eve. So Lilith being split and divided in two represents like an equality, where Eve being taken from the rib of Adam represents being derivative or lesser. So this is really where we get the story of Lilith. Ben Sira is putting this story together to kind of explain why there are two accounts of creation. And he pulls from the ancient myths and legend of the Lilu demon and Lilitu to say that this was the first wife of Adam. So, but what's really interesting, you hear these stories a lot, but let's actually read it directly. See what it actually says. Because I always find that, on my channel, we often read directly from the texts rather than just talking about them. We want to see what they actually say. So the Alphabet of Ben Sira says, when God created the first man, Adam, alone, God said, it is not good for man to be alone. So God created a woman for him from the earth like him and called her Lilith. So do you see right away that in this account, Lilith isn't created from the rib of Adam. She is created from the same thing that Adam is created. Adam was created out of the earth, and it says that Lilith was created from the earth like him. So there's an equality. Adam and Lilith promptly began to argue with each other. She said, I will not lie below. Basically, with regard to getting it on, she didn't want to, Adam wanted to be on top and dominate her. And she said, I will not lie below. And Adam said, well, I will not lie below, but above, since you are fit for being below and I for being above. You see, obviously this is symbolic here, but the idea is Adam is saying, hey, men are superior. You're a woman. You're fit for being below. That is what's getting across here. And so Lilith replied and said, the two of us are equal since we're both from the earth. See, and do you see how like Adam wants to be dominant and wants Lilith to be lesser? And it's not as though Lilith is going, no, I want to be the dominant one. You're the lesser one. No, Lilith just wants equality. Lilith just wants equality. And Lilith says the two of us are equal since we're both from the earth. And they would not listen to each other. Adam's just a dick. So since Lilith saw how it was, she uttered, has anyone seen Has Been Hotel, by the way? If you haven't seen Has Been Hotel, go watch it. It's hilarious. And Adam is in it. And they do a very good job of representing Adam as a total asshole. It's a great show. Go watch it. Anyway, she said to him, Lilith said to Adam, the two of us are equal. Oh, I read that already. Okay, so they wouldn't listen to each other. So since Lilith saw how it was, that Adam wasn't listening, this is very cool. She uttered God's ineffable name and flew away into the air. So this is such a cool moment. Lilith uttered God's ineffable name and flew away into the air. What does that mean? Well, ineffable is like unspeakable. It's like the unspeakable secret name of God. And so in a lot of like systems of magic and the occult, the name of God isn't just like a literal name, but knowing and saying and uttering the name of God is like having the power of God. And so she basically uttered God's ineffable name, which means she like claimed the power of divinity and flew away into the air out of the garden. Very cool. So, but Adam stood in prayer before God and said, Master of the universe, the woman you gave me fled from me. Well, yeah, because you're being a dick. Of course she's going to flee from you. So what happens is that, and this is, I don't know, I just love this idea of Lilith ditching Adam for Satan, the adversary. It's a very cool archetypal story. But anyway, let's continue here. So God immediately dispatched 3 angels, Senoi, Sensenoi, and Semengilaf after her to bring her back. So God said, if she wants to return, great. If not, she must accept that 100 of her children will die every day. So God is now cursing Lilith. If Lilith does not return, 100 of her children will die every day. By the way, Lilith became known as the mother of demons. And she became this, as we'll see in the Zohar, she became a succubus, basically. And she would also cause the deaths of children in pregnant women. And so she became this very demonic succubus figure. But anyway, God said, hey, either you're coming back or 100 of your kids are going to die every day. God's an asshole too. God and Adam, they're dicks. They're terrible. They're terrible. Just awful. And so the angels pursued her and overtook her in the sea, in the raging waters, the same waters in which the Egyptians would one day drown. So they're kind of battling in the sea, in the raging waters, and the angels, pursued her and overtook her. And they told her God's orders, and yet she refused to return. They told her that they would drown her in the sea. And she replied, leave me alone. I was only created in order to sicken babies. So this is where, so you see where this is now originally was a very misogynistic text, because Lilith wants to be equal to Adam. And now she becomes this demon and this curse on humanity. And she says, leave me alone. I was only created in order to sicken babies. If they are boys, from birth to day 8, I will have power over them. If they are girls, from birth to day 20. When they heard her reply, they pleaded with her to come back, and she swore to them in the name of the living God that whenever she would see them or their names or their images on an amulet, she would not overpower that baby. And she accepted that 100 of her children would die every day. Therefore, 100 of the demons die every day. She has these demonic children, and 100 of them die every day. And it says, and therefore we write the names of the 3 angels on amulets of young children. When Lilith sees them, she remembers her oath, and the child is protected and healed. So Lilith became this demon, the mother of demons, where she was cursed, and 100 of her demonic children would die every day. And she would basically cause the deaths of children as well, unless they had these protective amulets of these angels. And we're going to see this develops into the legend that a lot of people had about Lilith. Now, so this is the alphabet of Ben Sirah. And that's the story of Lilith that most people are familiar with, probably not in detail, but they have a vague idea of it. But now we're going to look at the Zohar, which is a very mystical text about the Kabbalah, which is a sort of mystical, secretive understanding of Scripture that describes now Lilith's relationship with the angel of death, or Satan, which is very cool. But before we do that, one thing that I want to point out that I think is very important to point out is about the alphabet of Ben Sirah. So, like I said, the alphabet of Ben Sirah was very misogynistic, but it was also very satirical. So it was kind of like written as a joke, because, for example, remember I told you there were farts in this story? Well, yeah. So in the alphabet of Ben Sirah, there's a lot of crazy stuff that happens in the alphabet of Ben Sirah. So people have come to the conclusion that this was a satirical text. And so in one of the stories in the alphabet of Ben Sirah, Nebuchadnezzar's daughter farts 1,000 times in an hour. And Ben Sirah has to come and I think like expel a demon from her or something so that she stops farting 1,000 times every hour. And there's other weird things in here, like answers to questions about why a donkey urinates in the urine of someone's companion, and why ravens have sex by the mouth. In other words, there's a lot of weird stuff in here. And so I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, why was the story of Lilith left out of the Bible? And people are usually like, oh, well, because the church didn't like it. Well, because it came from a satirical book was one reason. But and this is such an important point, though, because the story of Lilith continued to develop and it's taken very seriously, like in the Zohar, as she's described as Satan's partner, and they formed this dark dual pair. But the idea to understand here is that all of this shit are stories. That's why there's 2 contradictory accounts in Genesis, in the Bible. It's not like, oh, well, shoot, why is that? Oh, maybe he had another wife. No, it's because it's a story and they had 2 different versions of it. So what I mean to say is that it ultimately doesn't really matter where these stories come from. That's why so many people, like when I talk about Gnosticism, they're like, oh, well, those were forgeries, or those were written at this later date and time. Those basically, like, those are just stories. They're made up. All of this is made up. The Bible's made up. I mean, I'm sure that there are some real things that actually happened, but for the most part, all the insane miracles and talking donkeys and snakes and people being raised from the dead and all that, these are all just stories. So what our job is to look at these stories and interpret them in empowering ways, and find ways that these stories can help make our life better. And that's why, like, for example, in the story of Lilith, who originally came from this satirical, misogynistic book, has become an extremely powerful figure of women's liberation, because we're able to take these stories and interpret them and use those archetypal powers to create better lives for ourselves and each other as we use these powerful stories and these powerful narratives. So my point is that, you know, this is just a really good example of how all of this stuff, they are stories. They're not true. They didn't really happen, but they can be extremely powerful. I mean, obviously, look at the Bible. Look how much death, war, bloodshed, violence, witch burnings, the Inquisition, the Crusades. Look how these stories, which are just stories, have utterly transformed the world to its detriment. But they have the power to change the world, even though they're just stories. So when people are like, oh, Gnosticism, they're just stories, or Lilith, it's just a story. Yeah, so is the Bible. But when you interpret them in positive ways, when you have that you cause change in yourself and reality by interpreting them in positive ways, just like the Bible has changed reality in a very negative way. By harnessing the power of these stories, we can communicate ideas that are liberating to people. And that's what's important. And that's what we have to understand. And I just want to point that out, because a lot of people come to my channel. I don't think they understand that, because a lot of people go, you know, these are just stories, right? And it's like, well, yeah, the Bible, so is the Bible. All of these things are stories. And anyway, so I just want to point that out. But we're going to continue now to the Zohar, which is a very interesting book, a book of Jewish mysticism, and it's on Kabbalah. So this is basically like considered secret and hidden information, just kind of like Gnosticism is sort of like the secret version of Christianity. Kabbalah is kind of like the secret version of Judaism. And the Zohar is a book of the Kabbalah. So now we're getting into some very cool stuff. And it starts off by saying, the secret of secrets. So this is the secret of secrets. And I love how this is written. This is all written very, very interesting. And I love it. It's written very well. So, the secret of secrets. From the strength of the noon flame of Isaac, Geburah, from the wine lees, a naked shoot came forth, comprising together male and female, red like a lily, and they spread out on several sides, down several paths. This is so, we get away from kind of like the flatulent jokes in the alphabet of Ben Sira, and come to this extremely beautiful, brilliant way. And so remember, this is all meant to be interpreted in a symbolic way. So from the strength of the noon flame of Isaac, from the strength of Geburah, from the wine lees, a naked shoot came forth, comprising together male and female, red like a lily, and they spread out on several sides, down several paths. The male is called Samael, or the bitter beverage of God, and his female Lilith is always included with him. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. You have this brilliant red lily shooting out, combined into different paths, one being male, one being female. The female is Lilith, and the male is Samael, which literally means the bitter beverage of God. Well, let's take a minute here and find out, well, who is Samael? Well, as we discover, Samael is the angel of death, or Satan. And I didn't have my notes for this, so let me just look this up real quick so that we can get a good definition of Samael, the angel of death. So in Jewish beliefs, Samael is said to be the angel of death, the ruler of the fifth heaven, and one of the 7 regions of the world served by 2 million angels. He resides in the 7th heaven. And so he's very often associated with, he's kind of like the Grim Reaper. Samael, the angel of death, is kind of like the Grim Reaper, but he's also often associated with Satan. So the angel of death, Samael, is essentially Satan. And so what's interesting about this is that his name is Samael, which means the bitter beverage of God. But I've also seen, I did a little bit of research on this, and I don't know which one is more correct, but some places say the bitter beverage of God or the blindness of God. And bitter beverage is kind of like poison, right? Like the poison. But anyways, or it could be the blindness of God. And why am I even mentioning this? Well, it's because it's interesting because we see some commonality with Gnosticism here. Because if you take a look at Gnosticism, so according to Gnosticism, they look at the God of the Bible as being totally evil. That's not how Kabbalah looks at it, but I just want to draw an interesting comparison here. So according to Gnosticism, the God of the Bible is totally evil, and Satan, and his name is Yaldabaoth, and his name is Nibro, and one of his names is Samael. And in Gnostic literature, he is called Samael, the blind God. So we just see a lot of different connections here. In Gnosticism, you have this connection between the God of the Bible, Samael, and Satan as being essentially the same, representing the same being, that archetype of death and destruction and chaos. Now, over here in the Zohar, in terms of the Kabbalah, you have Samael, the angel of death, Satan. So anyway, really cool. We have the male aspect of this red lily, this power of male and female represented by a red lily, where the male is the angel of death, Samael, and the female, Lilith, is always with him. Now it says here, just as on the side of holiness, there are male and female, so on the other side, there are male and female included with the other. So according to, like Kabbalah is all about understanding the structure of divinity, the structure of reality, and the structure of the mind of God. And so when they're describing how the universe works and how reality works and the forces, and they're basically saying just like there are holy male and female pairs, this is the dark, the inverted male and female pair, which I think is super cool. And so we're going to see this is not looked at in a positive way, but we can claim it in a positive way. Just like Lilith was originally not written as a positive entity, but it was claimed by women's liberation movements. So too, we can claim this dark female pair, which I think is really cool because in Gnosticism, which again is not Kabbalah, but in Gnosticism, the male-female pair is Jesus and Mary Magdalene. It's in the Gospel of Philip where we have Jesus and Mary Magdalene united together in the bridal chamber, representing the union of the masculine and feminine divine energies together. So we have here on one side, sort of Jesus and Mary in Gnosticism, representing the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And then we have Lilith and Satan as being the representative of the demonic masculine and the demonic feminine, or the shadowy feminine, or the shadow masculine, whatever you want to call it, the shadow feminine. I think that's appropriate, the shadow masculine and the shadow feminine, complementary to the divine masculine, divine. So I think that's very, very cool. And we could see this And ultimately, that's what we would want to do because these energies exist within us. Remember, these are all stories, and these represent energies within us. So like in how we interpret the world, and in terms of what we talk about here in my channel, it's about embracing both light and darkness. So in this system, it would be about like embracing the light of the power of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, as well as the power of Satan and Lilith, harnessing these powers so that they're not enemies. And that's what we have to understand, is that they're not enemies. They're only enemies when you don't make them conscious. They are enemies if you don't make them conscious, but by integrating them, you harness them together. And so you have this beautiful kind of like axis where you have Jesus and Mary, Satan, and Lilith as representing all, this dark and light aspects of the masculine and feminine merged together, which is super cool. I love it. So they shouldn't be enemies. They should be integrated and working together. And how do we understand what that means? Well, we have to understand what they represent. We can understand, Jesus and Mary representing the masculine and feminine divine energies of things like care and nurturing and love and wisdom and knowledge and higher consciousness. And then we can understand Satan and Lilith as representing like the adversary is in rebelling against that which is detrimental to us in the world and using righteous fury to form our will and make movements in the world and all that power that comes with it, but directed in a positive way rather than it being a harmful way, because it can be very harmful, but you can also direct it in a powerful way. That's essentially what Satanism does, is it takes the archetype of Satan and turns it around so that it's used in a positive way. But I'm getting a little off topic here, but I think you see what I'm saying. I think you're seeing my point. I'm just excited about this because I think it's really cool. I love when, because darkness gets ignored a lot, and it shouldn't. It needs to be represented. And we hear about Jesus and Mary all the time, which I think is super cool, which is great. I love Jesus and Mary. I love that story. I think that that's awesome. But also having these archetypes of Satan and Lilith to work with, I think is so cool. Like imagine doing a version of like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. Like in the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, you usually invoke the 4 archangels, which I've always been very uncomfortable with, because it harkens back to Christianity for me, and with religious trauma syndrome, it's a little different. But imagine doing, instead of invoking the 4 archangels, you're invoking the power of Jesus, Mary, Satan, and Lilith, or something, something along these lines. Not necessarily that, but that's just an idea. And so, and remember, when I say invoke, it's not these beings as literal beings, but it means working with these energies within you and drawing them up and tapping it. So when you're talking about, say, the energies of Christ, it could be that represents the energies of like Christ consciousness, and the energies of Mary Magdalene could represent the energies of love and nurturing, and the energies of Satan could represent, the role of will and power. And then Lilith representing, adversarial roles that are oppressive, and using all of these powers within oneself to direct them towards positive ends, towards positive goals, always positive ends, always positive goals. So anyway, I'm going off a little bit because I'm excited about this. But you'll notice here, look, in the Zohar, this is not looked at as something positive. So it says, just as on the side of the holiness, there's always male and female, so on the other side, there are male and female, included one with the other. The female of Samael is called Snake, a wife of harlotry, the end of all flesh, the end of days. 2 evil spirits are attached to one another. The male spirit is fine. The female fine is in, like fine, not like, you're fine, but fine is in, fine. Whereas the female spirit spreads out down several ways and paths and is attached to the male spirit. So talking about how this energy works. She dresses herself in finery like an abominable harlot. And see, that's another thing that, I talked about embracing, like embracing the powers of Jesus and Mary and Satan and Lilith. Well, one of the positive ways of embracing the powers of Lilith, like say Mary represents, like nurturing and care and love. Well, Lilith can represent the power of sexuality. And that's so instead of looking, Lilith is an abominable harlot, like it's a negative thing. No, she represents the fires of passion and sexuality, which is extremely powerful and something that can be used in a beautiful way. It's not something that's inherently evil or wrong. It's something that is absolutely beautiful and can be. So do you see how we can take all these things that they look at as evil? Like they say the snake, like it's something evil. No, the snake is wisdom. The end of all flesh, the end of days, and she's like a harlot. Well, embracing this powerful fire of sexuality. Anyway, she stands at the corners of streets and highways in order to attract men. When a fool approaches her, she embraces him and kisses him and mixes her wine lees with snake poison from him. Once he has drunk, he turns aside after her. When he sees that he has turned aside after her away from the truth, she takes off all the finery that she has put on for the sake of this fool. So essentially what we could understand, though, is that like the power of sexuality, and that's the thing, when you work with archetypes like, say, Satan and Lilith, they're dark archetypes, they're shadowy archetypes, so they can be extremely destructive. But that's what happens when you don't integrate them. Because all of us have these urges within ourselves, and that's what forms our shadow. Have you ever heard of shadow work before? I'm sure you have. It's very popular these days. Shadow work is about exploring all your repressed urges, all the parts of you that you deny about yourself and go, oh no, that's evil, that's not part of me. Well, Satan and Lilith kind of represent these shadow aspects of ourselves that if they are not integrated, yes, they will destroy our lives, which means basically it's kind of like this. If you have an anger problem, but you repress it into your shadow, that means you deny that it exists. That means you tell yourself, I don't have an anger problem. But guess what? Does that make your anger problem go away? No, it just means you have an anger problem that you're not dealing with. And so now you're going to be a prick to people because your anger is getting, coming out all the time. Integrating is a fancy word for deal with. So integrating your anger would mean going, hey, you know what? I have an anger problem. And now I have to find a way to deal with it. How am I going to deal with it? Am I going to go to therapy and talk to a therapist about it? Am I going to channel that anger or aggression into perhaps art and maybe joining a death metal band and writing lyrics that are empowering, or focusing that energy towards joining an activist group that I care about? All positive aspects. But you see the difference here is that if you don't acknowledge it, if you don't integrate it, it can destroy your life. But if you do acknowledge and integrate it, you can command those powers of darkness towards your goals and your ends that will be improving your life and improving the world. So that's where we can look at, these satanic and the archetypes of Satan and Lilith as being very destructive if they are repressed into the shadow, because you have anger and sexuality and all that. If you deny it and don't acknowledge it, it will spill out into your life and cause you a lot of problems. It can cause addictions. It can cause all kinds of problems. And so by acknowledging it and integrating it, you are allowing that power to become a part of your consciousness and work, because energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. And so you're transforming that power and directing it so it's in accordance with your will rather than working against your will. And that was one of the big things that I think Gnosticism really got. I like Gnosticism a lot, but Gnosticism looked at a lot of these archonic powers as being evil, and they even looked at sex as being evil because, sex is of the material world and it traps souls on earth. None of this stuff is evil. It's just incredibly destructive if it remains in the unconscious and not dealt with in a healthy way. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be dealt with, but you can't just destroy it. But anyway, the Zohar continues by saying, this is the finery that she uses to seduce mankind, Her hair is long, red like a lily. Her face is white and pink. 6 pendants hang at her ears. Her bed is made of Egyptian flax. All the ornaments of the East encircle her neck. Her mouth is shaped like a tiny door, beautified with cosmetic. Her tongue is sharp like a sword. Her words smooth as oil. Her lips beautiful, red as lily, sweetened with all the sweetness in the world. She is dressed in purple and attired in 39 items of finery. So she's really here being described as the archetype of sexuality and seduction. But remember, this is being described in a negative way, but it doesn't have to be, obviously. We don't have, all these religions that try and make this stuff look evil is ridiculous. It can be destructive, like I already explained, but if it's healthily integrated, it's a very positive and empowering thing and critical for women's liberation. Like, women's liberation is about embracing one's sexuality, men trying to control how women dress and what they wear and what they look like and all that. It's a bunch of bullshit. So it's about embracing that power. And it continues by saying, the fool turns aside after her and drinks from the cup of wine and commits harlotry with her, completely enamored of her. What does she do? She leaves him asleep on the bed. And this is kind of where we get the idea of of succubus, by the way. She leaves him asleep on the bed and ascends to the realms above, accuses him, obtains authority, and descends. The fool wakes up, thinking to sport with her as before, to continue having sex, but she takes off all her jewelry and turns into a fierce warrior, facing him in a garment of flaming fire, a vision of dread, terrifying both body and soul, full of horrific eyes, a sharpened sword in hand, with drops of poison suspended and dripping from it. He kills the fool and throws him into Gehenna, or hell. And this is another very powerful image of what will happen when you try and suppress the feminine. When you try and suppress the feminine, you get that powerful resistance turning into that fire and garments of fire, a vision of dread, this terrifying power. And the patriarchy has been terrified of the power of women, which is why they continuously try to control and restrict them, because they are afraid of their power. They're afraid of their sexuality. They're afraid of their intelligence. They're afraid of their wisdom and nurturing and care and they're afraid of all the, and you know why they're afraid of these feminine aspects? Because they haven't integrated the feminine within them. So since they haven't integrated the feminine within them, it seems foreign and alien and threatening, because it's different, it's other, it's confusing, and it's a threat. If men would integrate their feminine, we wouldn't have half the problems we have today. Now, of course, women need to integrate their masculine as well. The reason why I'm just not emphasizing that is because we live in a patriarchal structure. There are a lot of things that aren't fair to men, and a lot of men's issues that occur today. But a lot of these issues occur because men have shot themselves in the foot by creating a patriarchal system. So, for example, one of the things that's very difficult for men is that a lot of them are unable to express their emotions. They're unable to express their emotions because society has told them that it is wrong. So they are very disconnected from their emotions. They're very cut off for their emotions. They don't know how to express their emotions. They feel like they can't talk about their emotions. They have to always, have this idea of what it means to be a man. And so, yeah, that's a huge problem. But guess what? This is a product of a patriarchal system that views the feminine as weak. It views the feminine as weak, and it views emotion as being feminine, and it views displaying emotion as being feminine. So yeah, there's a ton of men's issues that are very important, but this is why women's liberation doesn't just benefit women, it benefits men and everybody. Women's liberation benefits everyone, because women's liberation means that emotions would no longer be looked at as weak and negative, and then men would be more free to express and explore their emotions. So this world is really imbalanced right now. And the way that we can balance these, the world, is by embracing all these archetypes, all these balanced archetypes, the balanced archetype of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene and even Satan and Lilith, so that we're embracing both masculine and feminine, both light and dark. That's the way to become whole. That's the way to become healed. That's the way to become healthy. That's the way to become united together. So that it's not just about light and it's not just about masculine, but that it's about masculine and feminine, light and dark. And remember, we're being metaphorical about this. It's not like there's literal masculine energy. I always talk about this. What reality is literally made of is mathematical sinusoids. But we project these stories just like, there isn't literally Satan and Lilith. There isn't literally masculine, feminine energy, but talking about it in these terms can help us understand complex issues in a simple way. So I want to point that out because that's important. So so that's the end of the section in the Zohar that describes this. Like I said, it's in a negative way, but we can embrace them. We can embrace all these stories in a very powerful way. So I hope you enjoyed this, my friends. I really did. I liked it a lot. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm always curious to hear your thoughts. It means a lot to me. Check out my channel. I have a lot more videos on topics like this. And make sure you like and subscribe so that we can spread this information, and become a member on YouTube. It helps out a lot. Hit the join button, see all the different perks you can get. You can get access to all our members only videos. There's a new one every week. And we're doing one in just a few minutes that's about, is death now reversible? That's going to be a really cool video. We're going to be talking about that. And also check out my new book, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. I have a bunch of books out, actually, part of this series. So check them out and follow me on Spotify as well. All the links to all of these things are in the description of this video. And I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who supports. I appreciate it very much, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nusalina, Christopher, Eon, and Vanessa Moon. Thank you very much.